All right, so I'm going to be interviewing you just about the Black Lives Matter movement, police relations with certain races that we've seen in our country over the past, let's say, 2 years, and kind of how it affects the prep community. This is all kind of centered around prep itself, how we've dealt with these certain things. And the first question I have to ask is, I guess, kind of a broad one. And I'd say, to what degree does prep support the Black Lives Matter movement? Is it like a all-out support? Is it like an obvious, like, not against it, or is it? I obviously think this would be a no, but just a disregard to it.
The question at its heart is a difficult one to answer because the school exists to educate its students in a very certain kind of framework. So the school only wants to do work in relationship to its students. So St. Peter's Prep, um, the question is better understood in terms of how does St. Peter's Prep want or desire for its students to respond to that question in their lives. And certainly last year provided us with a very, powerful and meaningful occasion for students to respond to that. If you remember last year, students, right around the time frame of when Ferguson and the Staten Island issues were very strong and prevalent in the news, students took it upon themselves to desire and act out, a very brief demonstration, that was done in a very intelligent way in terms of trying to say something that they felt needed to be said and still keep, the schedule of the day intact and not get in the way of what they're here for in terms of the school. And they did that by staging, I guess what we could call the Black Lives Matter lie-in. If you remember, that's what many boys did, and even those who didn't had an opportunity just to witness it and probably think about it in some way that probably they wouldn't have thought about it if they didn't get to see it there at school. So St. Peter's Prep was certainly supportive of students choosing to do that, and you could ask many different adult individuals, what they think about that question, but I think it would be, not the proper way to respond to it by saying that St. Peter's Prep support something like that, something like the complex reality of Black Lives Matter as a movement. Instead, we'd always look to support the education of our students, and last year that gave a very interesting example for the students themselves.
So you talked about the line or dine, as some people called it. Another question I had involving the prep community itself is there anything more you think we could do to raise awareness about this, or that would kind of offer opinions of both sides and kind of just bring to light some of the misconceptions people have about this topic?
What to answer it in a general way, I think anything that can be done to help engender meaningful conversation and dialogue, or an opportunity simply to speak and to be heard, certainly from students themselves, amongst each other, or interplay with adults, here at school. Anything that can be done in that forum, I think, would be tremendous for students, because although the TV and news outlets are places where we ordinarily think we go to get information or sometimes to be told what to think, I think these years, these teenage years for our students are key times for them to learn to trust their own voice, but also to trust that dialogue that they have with their peers and with adults too. And so anything that we can do to, have these serious moments of conversation would be of great benefit to students in their development, and by doing that also affect the larger question of what's at issue in the country. By virtue of the fact that all of our graduates will be adults in the years ahead and play various roles in their own communities, and they'll only be strengthened in their own views on the world they live in by taking time during these years to learn to use their voices and use their minds to really think well. So anything that the school can do to help engender those conversations, which are coming up next week, of course, we'll be doing something where, school is busy, but even though it's busy, we're doing something to try to add something, in terms of next XY days, and looking at race issues in the United States.
All right, well, this next question I have, I wouldn't say it's more personal. I wouldn't say it's based on your opinion on what's happened in our country so far, but it's more based on things that have circulated as a cause. Do you think that a person is racist or at least prejudiced if they don't support the Black Lives Matter movement? And what I mean by that is not necessarily that they're like all out against it, and obviously the people who are really against it are, as you can label them, prejudiced. But if someone, obviously we've heard the term used, all lives matter, a lot, almost just as much as we've heard Black Lives Matter. Do you think a person like that who kind of wants to take away from that is a racist or prejudiced person, or someone just who thinks of things differently?
I think what is really at issue in the question is the degree to which people truly invest themselves in understanding what needs to be communicated, sometimes with simple terms. And so, racist is it's only a 6-letter word. What racist behavior looks like, what racism feels like in the United States, what it looks like and feels like elsewhere in the world, is a very complex and powerful thing. And there's, I'm sure, a spectrum of attitudes and behaviors that people could say that's racist and that's racist, but one could be clearly, vile, and another could be something less, far less than vile, and maybe just, I don't know, different examples are in my mind, but what I guess what I'm getting at is that, to use a term like racism or racist, and in the question, Black Lives Matter, I think that requires a lot of discussion as to just, what's the origin of the phrase, where is it born from, and where it's born from requires very clear understanding, and we need to bring our intellect to just what the reality is. Certainly it'd be wrong to say all lives don't matter. It'd be wrong to say Black lives don't matter. In the same way, it's right to say all lives matter, and it's right to say Black lives matter. What really needs to be done, and unfortunately our culture and our society often doesn't want to do the hard work of really learning to think for itself, kind of going back to that question before, that prep really can do great good for its students by engendering serious conversation, and real opportunity for reflection, so that it doesn't get, our students as they grow don't get pulled this way and that way by, polemic arguments, people screaming this and people screaming that, when they don't really understand. There's not an understanding of what really is being communicated in the terms or the phrases. So, back to your question, does a person who doesn't vocally support the statement Black Lives Matter, but instead would take, a phrase of all lives matter instead, I don't think it's necessarily a position that is contrary, or far worse would be racist, but I think it may not be doing the proper kind of justice to examining where that real statement comes from, because someone is speaking that, and I think we need to hear each other. We need to hear just what's behind the statements. Just like when I'm, if I have an issue, or, I'm frustrated here because of certain behaviors at school, I certainly need to state what the issue is, and hope that the person who's on the other side of my judgment takes to heart what the judgment is, reflects on it, realizes that's correct, I shouldn't be doing that, or in our handbook here, I said I wouldn't do that, and instead chooses to act in a way in accord with that, and then we have a better working relationship here at school, so to speak. So I think, to boil that down into a distinct answer would be the phrasing needs much more attention than just emotional response, rather than real understanding and listening to hear what the other person is really trying to say in that.
And then the last question, touching upon police itself, obviously, that's the main subject, is how law enforcement has handled things with people of the minorities. And my question is there really a police brutality problem in the United States? Not even just referring to race. Like, do you think that law enforcement officers sometimes overuse and take advantage of the powers they hold?
Well, this again touches on what I'm talking about, which is, one needs to have appropriate understanding, knowledge, and awareness of the reality of things. And I come from a long line of police. Many people that I care for in my life are police. I personally have found myself always feeling a sense of safety or care because I'm in the presence of police officers, both when I was young and even as an adult. But I know that that's not the experience that other people have, and depending on where you live, where you grow up, your race, your skin color, where you happen to be in any given moment can certainly play huge factors in how you feel about the police. Certainly the news has brought to light many instances that are not clear, to look at them, they don't seem to be in line with, how I previously described my experience of police. Police for me growing up, people who, I felt provided safety and security and care, from other people's perspective, that is not what they would see every time. I think that the right people to ask about that are those who observe with great clarity the work of police, and that would be police officers and the administration in the police, and the people who find themselves in contact with police, both in positive and negative ways. So, I think I kind of got a little fuzzy there with how exactly to respond. You want to rephrase the question to me a little bit?
This is, well, honestly, like when we talk about certain things, like not even in terms of this, just like say like there's a violence issue. People always wonder, is this actually an issue in our country, or is it just kind of like a controlled thing that just, it's a large country, things just happen sometimes. But with the amount of violent things that have happened involving law enforcement and people of minority groups, the real question is there a police brutality problem, or were those just specific instances?
Right. What seems to be at the heart of many of the instances that we would have seen by virtue of news stuff, things that actually make it to our TV sets or on the internet, police force moving from an appropriate realm of stopping something, clearly making a situation safe by using force to make the situation safe, versus force being used beyond the scope of what simply makes things safe and instead becomes something else. I think that conversation needs to get to a very explicit place where all people involved really do agree on what the scope, is and needs to be all the time, but also give credence and understanding to the very tough roles that most police officers will face in terms of being in a suddenly dangerous situation where the outcome is unknown. Clearly, when we see something on video, we see or we learn what the outcome is, but when you're in those moments, sometimes you don't know what the outcome is going to be, and I think just care always needs to be given to the side of life, and that's all lives, in terms of the police themselves and the person or the people to whom they're responding. But that's having never been in a situation like that myself. I've never been a police officer. I've never responded where I thought that my life may be on the line. I'm sure that if I was, I would have a much more heightened sense of how important it is to really give credence to, what it's like from a police officer's understanding, knowing that there's, clearly there needs to be listening going on in terms of, and understanding going on in terms of, all people involved knowing that life is valued and is seen as precious. So sorry that I wasn't a little more clear in my response.